Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and this is the final video in this series on the 6 acts of the shame cycle, as described by Martha Sweezy in her book, Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt. This is chapter 4, and it's illustrated with these brilliant real-life therapy sessions with Martha's client, Darika. And so we started with Act 3, which Acts 3 through 6 usually present first in therapy or in our lives. They gain attention. So Act 3 was about Darika's inner critics. Act 4 was about her anticipation team, anticipating threat. And Act 5 was about her warrior part that was mean to her boyfriend in order to deflect the shame and protect her. And was polarized with this part that was a doormat. And then in the last video, we talked about Act 6, which was Darika's Feel Better Rescue Team, which was represented by this binge eating of sweets. And as she got to know that part, it revealed this 4-year-old exile that it was protecting. So now, as we've gotten to know this whole protective team, Darika is now getting access. She's having more self-energy toward them now. And so now she's getting more access to Acts 1 and 2, which are about the original injury, the original shaming, external shaming, and the taking on of the burden by the exile of acceptance of I am bad. So I'm going to read this section to you. So clients come to therapy with present day concerns, yet we end up going into the past because something happened back then that burdened them with the beliefs and feelings that drive their current shame management strategies, those present day concerns. But because the shaming thing that happened is emotional plutonium, we often get to it last. Darika's exile turned out to be a multi-age child. So this is many incidences. She showed Darika how lonely she had felt at home, how she had clung to her grandmother. So in this, Martha's just talking about the witnessing stage and everything that this exile showed Darika about her experience. So how lonely she felt at home, how she clung to her grandmother, how she had been bullied at her private school by a female white European American gym teacher whose contemptuous remarks were explicitly racist. And finally, Darika reconnected with the tough teenage part who had turned away from her grandmother. She reminded Darika that she had been assaulted by a white European American boy after a football game at her high school when she was 14 years old. He was older, had been drinking, and was making racist and misogynist jokes during the game. She told him to shut up, or this protective part of her did. And later, as everyone was leaving, he punched her in the face. His friends dragged him away, and she lied to the school about her black eye because she feared the response from adults would call more attention to her in school. So her system is starting to reveal some of the core wounds that happened for Darika. So Martha, the therapist, says, with all this, what did she come to believe about herself? And Darika says that she was a throwaway. So the therapist here is trying to get to what is the burden that this part is carrying. She experienced all these things. What does she believe about herself because of it, which is the burden she carries? So she believes she's a throwaway. And the therapist asks, how does she feel now? Darika says, well, she can feel me here. So she knows that Darika's there with her. And the therapist says, and how is that for her? Darika says, good. And the therapist says, when she's ready, but there's no rush, but when she's ready, you can help her let go of that belief. So witnessing can be a quick process, or it can roll out over more than one session, sometimes even a year. Its defining feature is ease, however. With protector resistance down and the exile's needs being met and a strong connection with the self, what it shows or tells is often deeply personal and moving to witness. If any protectors get nervous along the way, our job is to help them proactively so that the exile can continue telling its story and directing the show. We may also want to remind the exile, as I do in the preceding case, that its burdens can be released whenever it is ready. So there's never any forcing. There's always an awareness of when protective parts may come in, and a direct addressing of them and meeting their concerns so that they can relax. Because when the protective parts are relaxed, the person's self is available. And then the process of witnessing and reparenting and retrieving and unburdening is very, like she said, it's full of ease. It just flows very naturally when the self is there. So as the therapist or coach, really all you're doing is trying to help any other parts relax and make the way for that. And then you can sit back and watch the beautiful, beautiful process of the person's self meeting that part. And then I'm just going to read a couple more paragraphs at the end of this chapter. Martha says, so let's go back to where we started. Bad things happen. Children who take them to heart believe I am fill in the blank, too much, too little, defective, unfit, unworthy, wrong, and the like. They get burdened with a dangerous identity. Their self, their capital S self, would know that the original insult was a motivated fiction, but they don't have access to their self. So the insult becomes a source of personal suffering and interpersonal conflict. Although many cultures, religions, and governing institutions are attached to the idea that shaming is a necessary tool of education and social control, that shamefulness is they believe that shamefulness is essential to self-inhibition. The sense of worthlessness does not produce our better nature. Compassion does that. It does not repair relationships. Healthy guilt does that. It does not lead us to forgive each other. Only kindness and mercy do that. There's another passage earlier, which maybe I'll do a video on. She so eloquently talks about why shaming is not productive. It's just not effective in achieving what we really want over time. It produces this shame cycle. It produces people who have self-loathing and harsh inner critics on the inside, who suffer immensely and then begin to push it outside with rage and meanness toward others and addictive behaviors, and become hypervigilant and anxious. And it's just not worth it. But it makes sense. It makes complete sense that we have a whole epidemic of people who are anxious and depressed and raging and have all kinds of mental health issues because our cultures, our religions, our governments sanction shaming our children. They believe that it is somehow warranted to keep them out of trouble. But Martha's belief, as is mine, is that it is not worth it. It is not effective. And I know for me, I didn't know an alternative. Early on in my children's lives, I spanked them. I shamed them because that's the legacy burden that was passed down to me. And I began to see that it wasn't effective, that it caused turmoil for me and for them, and disconnection for us. But I didn't know anything to replace it. I didn't know anything different until I found nonviolent communication. I highly recommend Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, as well as Ross Green's book called Raising Human Beings, which is about nonviolent communication and parenting. And a lot of people are now coming online with conscious parenting and really understanding that shaming is just a disaster waiting to happen. Yeah, but the last paragraph says, in therapy, we do not treat the bad thing, which is history. We reveal its underlying fiction, and we explore whether self-generated negative strategies have been effective at preventing more injury. It's kind of like, was it Dr. Phil that used to say, is that working for you? Right? It's kind of like, but in a kind way. The self asks it in a very kind, loving way to the parts, the protective parts. Is your strategy working? Is it preventing re-injury? Is it preventing criticism and shame? And usually those protectors go, no, I work so hard day in and day out, and it just doesn't work, and so we can have compassion on them. It says, because the protectors who create the negative strategies have positive intentions for us, if not for others, we befriend them, we appreciate them, we praise them. And when they feel validated with us, they feel safer. And then they let exiled parts tell their stories. Feeling heard and loved, exiles begin to discard their shaming beliefs about their value, at which point I am reverts to it happened. That's the healing right there. Through the loving gaze of the self, they can release this burden of I am bad, I am flawed, I am unlovable. And they see, oh no, that's not true. I experience that the self, the loving gaze tells me I am good, I am valuable, I am loved. So that means that wasn't true. Yes, the incident happened. Yes, I was shamed. Yes, it was painful, but it wasn't true. It happened, but I am not shameful. So the whole cycle comes full circle and the healing happens. So I hope that for every single one of you to be able to get curious about this cycle and all the parts involved, and to be able to go in with the unconditional love of the capital S self, what I believe is the divine in us, and to offer that healing gaze to those parts that have held that painful shame for so long. It will heal everything connected to it. All the protective parts will be able to relax. There will be more capacity to have healthy relationship with other people. It's so worth it to begin getting curious about this. So thank you so much for listening to this. Again, I'm just sharing Martha's work because I just feel like it's so brilliant. But if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below.